Scaling your practice sounds exciting, but what about the metrics that you have to measure in order to scale successfully? Well, that sounds boring, but if you don't know them, then your odds of scaling successfully are actually quite low. My guest today helps his clients scale their practices, and he's going to convince you that knowing your metrics is the first step to doing so successfully. I'm Carl White, principal at Mark Advisory Group, which is a healthcare marketing agency, and I'm also the host of Practice Care. The mission for both is the same, and that's to help private practice owners stay private. Not only is that usually what they want anyway, but care is better when the provider owns the practice because that's when they can make all the decisions around patients that they feel matter most. Anything from the clinical decisions they've got to make, even down to scheduling. Do you double? Do you triple? Do you rush? What do you do? When the provider owns the practice, they have all the freedom to make that work best for everybody. And my guest today is Adam Russo. A social worker by training, Adam Russo founded Edgewood Clinical Services, a behavioral health practice that he scaled to 140 employees and 8 figures in revenue. He sold the practice in 2020, became the regional vice president with the equity group that purchased them, and after 2.5 years, transitioned into business coaching, which is what he's doing today. He owns and runs Reliable Coaching and Strategy, where he brings his experience and training as a coach to help his clients scale their practices successfully. Adam, thanks for coming on Practice Care.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, you and I met recently, and so this is a really good episode to talk about some practices. Some private practice owners want to stay where they are, no judgments. Others want to scale. Neither's particularly easy, but probably scaling is a bit harder. So this is going to be really helpful, I think, to a lot of our listeners. But let's start where I always start. Anybody who's listened to more than 2 episodes knows I asked for a short bio about you. That's what I read. Help us get to know you a bit better.
Yeah, I mean, so as you said, I'm a social worker by training. I had my practice for about 16 years and went through the growth phase. It was the last probably 6 or 7 years where we did the most amount of our growth. It really kind of got on a light speed pace. Once we hit about maybe about 2 million is when it really kind of shot up. But no, I mean, I've had my practice for a long time. I was very active in the community as well. I was on the board of a couple not-for-profits locally, and and always active in psychoeducation, especially with kids and families. Our practice was a child and family focused practice, so always enjoyed giving time back to the community through different presentations, things like that. Just have always been, I love the entrepreneurial journey. Is probably That's one thing I realized after I sold is I miss being on my own. So
Gotcha.
The entrepreneurial journey is certainly an interesting one, and you have to have the right stomach, I think, to be able to pursue it. And I think it's in healthcare, I think makes it especially difficult just by the nature of the industry.
Really? Yeah. Well, and tell me a bit more about what you mean by that.
Yeah, I mean, because any business, the most important part with a business is to be able to set your pricing. And in
Right.
healthcare, you can't really set your pricing.
Yeah.
You can try, you can come close, maybe you can be successful depending on how long you've been around and how big you are. But but as a healthcare business, you're operating under a certain set of rules that you have to live with,
Yeah.
and pricing models that you have to live with. And when you have things like the hyperinflation that happened a few years back, that's a real dig into bottom lines when you have fixed revenue staying in one place, and salaries of administrative staff and things going up 20-25%. It's a hit. And so that's why pricing, we don't have the luxury of just changing the pricing with the economy,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
I didn't connect those dots before until just now. Yes, inflation was crazy over the past few years. It set a new normal, even if it's slowing down. It doesn't mean that prices are getting smaller. They're just not getting as big as fast. But you're right. Like insurance reimbursement rates I'm not even sure they went up. They certainly didn't
I don't think,
keep
yeah, I don't
pace.
think they did.
Yeah. I mean, and so here we are. I'm curious, did you always have it in your mind to like, you know, I want to be as big as you became? Probably not specifically, or did you, when you open, you're like, you know what, I've got the shingle, I've got a healthy practice, good enough for me, and then it changed, or were you always like, you know what, I see something bigger?
Yeah, my thought was always to get bigger, and mainly because, well, and funny, just bring it back to the first comment, mainly because to me, because healthcare pricing is so fixed,
Hmm.
my thought was volume solves that problem.
Yeah.
That the more people you have, that's really the only way to generate meaningful revenue.
Hmm.
Other than because you just can't raise your prices. So my thought was, expenses are going to go up every year between raises and salaries, rent, insurances, all those costs are going to go
Yeah.
up. So the only way to stay ahead of it is through growth. That was always my thought. And And so I did want to grow and honestly just see how big I could take it.
Hmm.
And I think I took the practice to be about as big as I could have on my own,
Hmm.
until I would have needed, more investors essentially to come on in, because the banks that I work with were great, but I even got to a point with them where they said, we're lenders, not investors. So,
Oh,
there gets to a point with scale and growth that, you do have to go to an investing route, and which is ultimately why I decided to just let it all go.
you didn't want to do that?
No, I talked to different people. I mean, their suggestions. Well, first of all, the way they did their valuations and everything were just kind of all over the map. It didn't make any sense to me. And then, most of them basically wanted the short term hold. I didn't find any long term people, so they wanted
Mm,
to really kind of gut the practice, drive the profitability, and sell it. But they also wanted me to stay on as like a 40% owner and hold that much of the risk while they did it. Like, it just didn't make sense to me, not from a financial perspective or from a quality of care perspective, and what we had already built with the people, et cetera. It wouldn't have gone well. So that was why, finding, being able to just let it go to an aligned company made the most sense to me.
got it. Okay. Yeah, we've had a few guests come on about when you're selling to private equity, essentially the message is be eyes wide open. And one of the things they say
Mm-hmm.
is you've got equity now and you've got like an earn out phase, and man, the devil's in the details. So good for you
Mm-hmm.
for seeing all that
Yeah.
before you went in.
Yeah.
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 So let's get into it. So we're talking about, if you want to scale, you better know your metrics. Why? Why is that so critical? I mean, it's an obvious question in a sense, you don't do anything on a wing and a prayer, but why? Let's just put some granularity to it.
Yeah. I think first, I think, entrepreneurs are interesting people, I think, in that while
It's like six ways we can go on that one, but go ahead.
yeah, right, yeah, but I mean, well, and I'll say it in the sense that, while being an entrepreneur in many respects is a big risk taking venture, right? But what's really interesting to me is that also most entrepreneurs are also pretty conservative when it comes to their decision making. So you have to kind of, because if someone's on their own and things are working, right? The there isn't a lot of risk that they want to take on additionally, because
Hmm.
really, like, if it ain't broken, don't fix it, right?
Yeah.
So and then a lot of the decisions as time goes by can be based more from an emotional place than anything else. And when you're making decisions about what to do with your business, yeah, you can have your intuition and, gut feelings and all that kind of stuff, but you need something objective to balance
Hmm.
that out with.
Hmm.
I mean, I know for myself, if I was pretty averse to risk. I was one of those very strange entrepreneurs. I got to a point where, if there were things that we wanted to do, I personally wouldn't like the feeling of doing it.
Hmm.
But if I looked at numbers that called me stupid if I didn't do it, then
Yeah.
it makes it kind of easy to
Yeah.
be able to make the decision and fight whatever's going on internally. So the numbers to me, and why to track them, are you need to have to be grounded in some kind of truth about your business
Hmm.
that doesn't care what you feel. It's
Yeah.
telling you how the business is doing.
Yeah. And I wonder if the reason that well, we'll get to the next question. I don't want to get, it seems like people react in extremes. They either go super conservative or they go, let's just take a flyer because I need to do something. But life is lived in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
Did you ever experience that? Like not you personally, but does that sound
Yeah,
reasonable to
because you
you?
have
Like
people. Yeah, because
absent
you're right.
information,
Like,
you go with your gut. Your gut
they
says
go with
stay
it.
still
Yeah,
or just go take a flyer.
or just go for it. And I
Yeah.
think, there's nothing. And the problem is that even when you go for it, though, you have to understand what it is you're going for.
Hmm.
So even when people, especially if it's in a lot of respects, it is with marketing or, growth and development, is kind of,
Hmm.
under that purview. And oftentimes in that, a lot of owners don't have it defined about what it is they're trying to achieve by when. So and part of it is because they don't even know what they're doing today. So it's really, if they don't know what they're
What do you
doing
mean? I'm
today, it's
seeing
really hard for
patients.
them.
I'm collecting. Everybody's happy. What do you mean? I
Yeah,
don't know what I'm doing today. Interesting.
that's exactly it. Yeah, but they
Yeah.
don't. But they don't really know in a very objective way how their practice is functioning. So they might say, yeah, we have 30 grand. Let's put it into some marketing thing, and
Hmm.
then they'll say nothing worked. Well, but what was the criteria? What were you hoping to have happen?
Hmm.
Was your money spent in a certain direction to affect that criteria? Right? I mean,
Hmm.
there's all these questions that go into it. So I think it's easy to just say I'll put money into X, Y, or Z. But if you don't know what you're trying to do with it,
Hmm.
and that isn't defined. You could put money into anything and lose it.
Yeah.
But you have to, but you got to figure out what it is that you're trying to do so you can ensure some level of success,
Yeah.
or at least a measurement that's not just anecdotal, or
Yeah.
that is something that's real more meaningful.
Yeah. And I'm wondering, like for you, so when you're starting out with a client, how often they resist measuring things and why? Like what reasons? The reason I'm asking is, hopefully, if what you say resonates with some listeners, it'll help them, get over it. And
Sure.
say, I'm not
Yeah.
alone. I'm not thinking crazy. Other people think like this. So, what barriers do they throw up and say, "Oh, come on, man, really? Do I have to do this?"
Yeah, I think most people are averse to it. I think it's, and honestly, I think more in healthcare than in other industries that I coach.
Mm-hmm.
And healthcare seems to be one where it is. It's like, hey, I'm seeing patients. Like, what do I need to track all this other stuff for?
Mm-hmm.
Or a big reason is we're just not big enough yet. Like,
Mm-hmm.
there's me and one other person. Like, I don't need to track anything. I just got to make sure my bills are
Mm-hmm.
paid or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And so part of and ultimately, I think those those excuses maybe that people give are mainly ways of saying I don't know how to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we get into actually getting into it, and
Mm-hmm.
building dashboards and making
Mm-hmm.
meaningful numbers, they start to really embrace it, because
Yeah.
they really start to see the value. But I think a lot of people inherently just don't know how to do it, and with all the work they have going on, they don't really want to put the work in kind of to teach themselves, because they kind of view it as a waste of time.
Yeah. And I wonder for you, like, the ultimate question is sometimes there's a bad experience where there's just like a vomiting of data on them and they don't really know. In marketing, you can do the same thing. I
Mm-hmm.
tell clients I could bury you alive in data, but I keep it really slim because most of the data I can give you, um, I learned this saying called "so what, now what." So the "so what"
Mm-hmm.
is what's it telling me, and the "now what" is now what do we do with it? And if the answer to the second one is not really sure, then we kind of blow it off because we can't find
Mm-hmm.
any good practical use for it. And so when you strip all those away, is it the same thing with you? Do you ever find clients who say, I used to see this stuff, but nobody could ever tell me what it meant, so I just kind of stopped.
Yeah, yeah. At times, I think it kind of comes from the place of I think people understanding what it is that they're trying to get out of the metrics in the first place.
Hmm.
Because I'll talk with owners who actually really like metrics and really get excited about the idea of putting it together, but
Mm-hmm.
they're so far in the weeds sometimes about what they're trying to do. So if I
Hmm.
ask them a question, if they're stuck in this place, they're telling me about what they're trying to gather, from the data side, and I'll say to them, like, okay, so explain to me how this is going to help you, get the 10,000-foot view of your practice,
Hmm.
every month, and they can't do it.
Yeah.
And it's like, so then do we really need this?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and that's and every because every especially even within healthcare, there's different things to track and measure for different
Hmm.
reasons. But ultimately, the goal should be to me, um, when you're a small business, revenue tends to be everything, right? You want to make sure you're getting your revenue. But the
Hmm.
problem in healthcare is that revenue, especially if you're working with insurance, is at least a couple of weeks in arrears. So you can finish a month, but your cash flow is only reflecting maybe 2.5 weeks of a
Right.
given month.
Yeah.
So from a metric perspective, to me, it's always important to say at the end of a month, when I look at my number of visits, number of new patients, all these things, can I take that number and make a crosswalk into an expected revenue number, so
Hmm.
I know how I'm doing,
Hmm.
because I don't want to wait and be surprised in 2 weeks when money isn't coming in,
Yeah.
because we were short 15% on our visit goal, and
Yeah.
that correlated into a huge revenue loss that we've got to make up for,
Yeah.
in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah. So it sounds like one of the early steps with you with a new client is let's get some metrics. I call them like finger on the pulse metrics of the
Yeah.
practice. Let's get them down. No
Yeah.
matter what
Yeah.
anybody wants to do or why they engaged you, we have to know what we're looking at. Is that right?
You have to know. Yeah, it is. And a big part of that too is asking, and owners have to do a little bit of work too, because a lot of it has to do with, given, EHRs are funny. People will say, oh, do you recommend one or this or that? I mean, my thing is always, it's the devil, right? That's usually
Yeah,
what it
there's all
is.
sorts of examples.
Because,
Yeah. They're all the
yeah, I
same.
mean,
Just pick one that you like and yeah.
yeah, because they're not, I mean, because there is not one that's perfect. There are some that are very strong clinically. There are some that are very strong financially. So like you have to just know what if you have one that you tend to be able to build workarounds to what you can't get. But if
Yeah.
you switch, you're going to have to build other workarounds because you're going to lose some kind of functionality that you have.
Yeah.
But to me, it's always about the first step is how do you know what data your EHR can even pull? How do
Hmm.
you know?
Hmm.
And let's at least start with what you can get. Because as much as you can have a dashboard with metrics and information, it should also be a user-friendly experience to build as much
Hmm.
as possible.
Hmm.
And so part of that means, so what can your EHR pull out for you that
Yeah.
we could use to then generate a dashboard, and how are we going to use that so it's workable?
Right. 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 And then when you're talking about scaling with a client, what metrics do you recommend they look at? And I'm curious, are there metrics that you say, because you're scaling, we should look at these, but generally we should look at those, or what kind of overlap? I'm just kind of curious. Like when it's
Yeah, I
scaling,
mean,
so what
so
do you look at?
so to me, I mean, scale is I talked to there's a sales guy I know, I've known him for a while, and he always used to say there's only two ways to grow a business: get new customers or get your current customers to buy more stuff. And that's kind of it. And so when you're
Yeah. Yeah.
talking,
Yeah.
and when you're talking scale in service-based industries, especially healthcare, retention of patients and retention of providers is like the number one,
Yeah.
you know, like the top of the top of everything is retention.
Hmm.
And so to me, one of the stats that people have to be able to figure out is their patient retention and their staff retention.
Hmm.
And and if there's a problem, what's the problem with either, right?
Hmm.
They have to understand that. Then the next part to me goes to, if depending on how big the practice is, what's the total capacity of hours that providers have, every week, and how much of that is being fully booked. And
Hmm.
then out of what's being fully booked, what percentage are actually showing up?
Hmm.
And what does that visit number look like translated into revenue? Then
Yeah.
it goes to me, new client inquiries, new patient inquiries, right? I mean, how many are you getting per day, per week, per month?
Hmm.
How many are you booking?
Hmm.
What's that conversion rate? Why are you losing them? Because the reality is that if you have and this happens in our practice all the time, we can be booking at max capacity for clinicians and having ultimately show rates of 87-88% of that.
Hmm.
And then you're having, let's say in a given week you have 50 new patient inquiries, but you're only converting less than maybe 10% of them. A lot of that is because you just don't have room. There's just nowhere to put them.
Yeah.
So then when you're, as an owner, what you're looking at is, well, everyone's pretty full. We have a huge demand, and we're turning them away. We're referring them out.
Hmm.
It sounds like we should be high. We sounds like we
I was
should be
just going to
growing,
say, like,
right?
well,
Yeah,
you either slow down the machine or you increase
yeah,
capacity to meet it. Yeah.
yeah. So the numbers should be able to tell stories as you look at them, to be able to give you insight into, where are we trending to, or
Hmm.
when we get to X part, because we know, people might say, depending on the specialty, it'll take 3 to 6 months to bring on a provider. Well, so are you waiting till you're totally booked to start that 3 to 6 month process, or are you starting it maybe 2 months earlier so that you can hopefully get a running start into it?
Yeah. How often do you successfully convince people that? Because you want to talk about the definition of risk, hire somebody before you're sure you can fill them. Um,
Yeah,
you know?
it's well, but that's why we track the numbers, because
Mhm.
I would say to them, because I don't want to make that decision. It's their business, right? So for
Mhm.
me, it's, look, these are what the numbers are saying, right? You
Mhm.
see it. So what does this tell you for next steps? What do you want to do?
Mhm.
And that's where the conversation comes in. And if they're nervous about it, well, let's talk about why. Because it's really not about the way your business is doing. It's what you're experiencing personally.
What do you mean?
And
Like just
well,
their own
because
kind of fear factor, their own, yeah.
totally. Yeah, absolutely. Because mostly it is mostly fear that gets in the way of entrepreneurs,
Mhm.
and what gets in their own heads of, and it's true,
Yeah.
I think, across industries. And if they're worried about making the wrong decision about something, then it will get in the way. You will have missed opportunities because they're trying to play it almost too safe.
Yeah. And I wonder, do you ever get into, let's imagine, let's say you end up being wrong and the person, it's not like it's a forever decision. Like what happens then? All right, well, we part ways, sadly, and you you don't keep that person forever. It's not a lifetime
Yeah.
contract, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, you're right.
Yeah,
It's still
and
a
I've
fee.
had that conversation. And even if it's a salary position, we'd say, what's the worst that can happen? Let's cash flow it out, and help put together cash flow models and
Hmm.
say, so if their anticipated break even point might be at month 4 or 5,
Hmm.
um, can you at least make it that long? And
Yeah.
this is what it is. And when you start, and the cash flow models seem to really help because I think people think um, there's a lot that goes into it. I mean, there's different investments and things like that, but for the most part, when people, kind of the numbers can really help somebody get a little bit more comfortable with some of the decisions, just because it makes the fear a little bit more tangible. And when
Yeah.
they see what it is tangibly, it's not as scary.
Yeah.
Is what it seems like, and
Yeah.
which is why I think metrics are always just, again, regardless of how big somebody is, just really important.
God, I got to talk to you offline because my thing is I don't get hired to do marketing until we've hired the person. Now we need them filled. I don't disagree,
Yeah,
but a little bit of lead time might have been nice. I mean,
yeah.
but so I'm going to have to ask you the script I can use to get somebody to, we just get started a little earlier. Yeah. Or I just
Yeah.
open, I need patience. I bet you needed them before you opened too, but yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. It
Yeah.
must help that you've got all this counseling background because a lot of this is, the putting together the numbers is probably the easier part of convincing, not convincing, but like leading them to here's the decision. Do you want to make it? And when you're talking fear, not numbers. I wonder, you ever like, I'm glad I was a counselor for 25 years or whatever it was, because that's where we are right now. It's not a numbers discussion.
Yeah, well, it's funny. It comes up way more than I would have thought it would. I mean, that's why, for me, coaching is a nice blend of that clinical and entrepreneurial, where,
Yeah.
there's sometimes some meetings I'm talking with somebody and it is way more of a, have to get in their head on, all right, what's making you tick here, because this isn't making much sense to me.
Yeah.
And, versus the business kind of side of things of, how are you, scaling, or, your culture and process, and,
Hmm.
all these different kind of things that go along with it.
Right.
So the meetings can kind of, flip flop, or, kind of be themed on one side or the other, depending on what's
Yeah.
going on.
Yeah. But really, which I mean, if I take your metrics and kind of boil them down, what I was taking away was you're figuring out supply versus demand,
Hmm.
right? And how
Yeah.
I guess clean is the demand, for every 10 inquiries you get, how many become patients, versus how much space do you have?
Hmm.
Yeah. Is that pretty much?
Pretty much. I mean, it's really not that complicated. It's more about the discipline that the practice has to just track it however they want to do it, day, weekly, month,
Yeah.
whatever it is. But they've
Yeah.
got to look at, they've just got to really be, you can't, I say to all my clients, I mean, you can't scale without, um, without, I think, as a founder, kind of changing who you are. And what I mean by that is, when you go, I think I said this to you when we met
Hmm.
previously, as a business goes up, it goes to about 500,000, 750,000 in revenue, you can kind of outwork any problem that starts coming along.
Hmm.
But when you start hitting that kind of million in revenue mark, you've got to start out thinking it. And then as you start
Yeah.
out thinking it, it means you've got to really start changing your level of focus and
Hmm.
intentionality on what you're doing.
Hmm.
And that includes your numbers and metrics, in
Yeah.
addition to your people, your process, and your strategy. And a lot of owners, as they grow, just kind of want to do things the way they've always done them, but in the end, it's hurting their ability to grow more than helping.
Yeah. And I saw something, I don't know if I said this when we first started talking. Um, essentially the idea was whenever your revenue triples, so you're at 300,000 and you've got a certain way of getting things done, systems, whatever. But when it triples, everything breaks. It just
Mhm.
bursts. It's not built for that. And so you're right. You've got to outthink it at that point and rebuild and retool. How often do you recommend, you mentioned, whether you measure it daily, weekly, monthly, what do you recommend as a good kind of cadence to keep your, finger on the pulse of these metrics?
Yeah, I mean, I think, it's interesting. So I
Or maybe
tend
it
to think
depends on what you're
monthly.
measuring. Like I would imagine cash
Yeah.
flow you want to keep a closer eye on, then I'm not sure what a good example would be, less so, but
Well, I mean, it depends. Like, I think for the most part, monthly tends to work. I think the bigger issue is that when businesses are coming up with their goal numbers, that they're being realistic about them,
hmm.
because whatever goal numbers are, they might not translate into nicely into a monthly goal, because there's too
Hmm.
much variability. So you can, so my first thing is always, if a business isn't managing their goals off of a 47 or 48 week year, and instead they're looking at it as a 52-week year, they have a problem because
You're
people are taking
right.
off. So
Yeah.
like, you gotta
Yeah.
align your goals to how much people are actually working, and then
Hmm.
you can take that number and divide it by 12. But then the problem is that doesn't account for when they take it off. So so you have kind of the monthly goal on one hand, but then you also have, I always look at it as like a fundraising thermometer. Like
Hmm.
you also have to fill it over the course of the year. So
Hmm.
over the course of a given month, the average monthly provides the context, but the
Hmm.
reality is what you're trying to do is fill that thermometer over the course of a year. So
Right.
so that's where some of that stuff comes with a grain of salt.
Got it. Got it. Okay. And then who else do you like to get involved? So I'm thinking of there's an accountant or an accounting firm that's helping. Sometimes it's a family decision, like when, your client says, I want to triple in the next 5 years or whatever it is. Um, it's not usually him or her just kind of going in isolation, right? There's more people that need to be involved to make that happen. You know what I mean?
Yeah, honestly, I'd say it depends. Like when I went through it, I mean, it was really just me, and I work with my business banker quite a bit on a lot of these things. Sometimes I'd have my accountant model some things out,
Hmm.
just to make sure I was right or double check my work, I guess.
Hmm.
I think part of it depends on how financially savvy
Yeah.
the owners are. Because one of the big things I like to do is put together, if you have a practice, let's say they take the big five insurances, and they bill a set, certain set of codes, right?
Hmm.
There's a weighted average of reimbursement for each code that they bill,
Hmm.
relative to the patient population, and et cetera, et cetera. So
Hmm.
they've got to figure out those weighted averages per code, figure out then what the anticipated amount of percentage of time these codes are each getting billed, right? And then
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that's how you should figure out the projection of revenue. And depending on what kind of practice you are, what business you are, the service lines that you have are going to impact your strategy for growth tremendously, because
Hmm.
you might have some service lines that aren't as profitable as others,
Hmm.
and so you're going to have to decide, well, then how do we what do we want to leverage for growth? So
Yeah.
there's all those different kinds of decisions that come up.
Yeah. And don't get more money losers. I mean, you
Yeah.
take, so yeah, interesting. Um, I love it. I mean, I say this to a lot of guests. We could go deeper and longer on this topic, but we're sort of here in the bite-sized variety of business advice. So there's a couple of questions I ask every guest to wrap it up. The first one is we covered a lot of ground, but is there anything you think we should have talked about or I should have asked you, but I just didn't do?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think more as a kind of a summary point. I mean, I think for any owners, it's really just not to be scared of those numbers, to try to put together. If they know that they want to have a certain amount of visits a month,
Hmm.
set it as a goal. Just start measuring something
Yeah.
to let you know how are you doing objectively. Don't just be because with insurance-based practices, what gets deposited in your account can be deceiving, because you might have a month where you had visits from 3 months earlier all get deposited, and so you
Oh
might say, oh
yeah.
yeah, we're doing great, but it's just misleading you because the cash is not lining up to what's actually being done. So
Yeah.
to me, just tracking that number alone is a huge first
Yeah.
step.
Is there a certain type of profile of person who you would say, you know what, scaling's not for you? It's not a negative, it's just,
Um,
and what do they look like? Or maybe
well,
not.
I think it depends on their goals, right? I mean, I've had a few clients who started to want to work with me with the goal of scaling, and once we started really going through the process, the strategic planning process on it, they decide not to for different
Okay.
reasons. And a big part of it is I don't pull any punches about what goes into scaling.
Hmm.
And so people have to really know what they're getting into
Hmm.
in order to do it. And
Hmm.
and so um, you don't have to scale just for the sake of scaling, but you do have to know what your limits are
Hmm.
and what it is that you want to do. Um, and because the most important part is to stay aligned within oneself, right? Like if someone is not comfortable at all with fast growth and large growth, then
Yeah.
taking their business in that direction, it's not going to go well. So
Yeah.
they've got to just get clarity on what it is that they want for themselves.
Are there any particular specialties within healthcare where you say it's more amenable to scaling or less amenable, or it doesn't really matter?
I don't know how much it matters, because so much of to me, so like I was saying before, so much of scaling is about retention.
Hmm.
So I think you've got to be obviously good at what you do, right? That's a
Hmm.
huge part of it.
Hmm.
But then you've got to get retention, and the big part of retention is your organizational process and your people.
Mhm.
So you've got to hire the right people and have the right processes, so that things can go really well. So
Right.
if you're not investing in those things purposefully, then it's going to be hard to scale too.
Yeah, absolutely. Makes our job, makes everyone's job a lot easier if the
Yeah.
patients who you work so hard to get stay with you. That's
Yeah.
the whole point anyway, right? My other wrap-up
Yeah.
question is, so we've caught listeners' attention. They're like, you know what? I've been thinking about this. He's right. Um, I should start measuring. I should start getting my arms around this, but they just don't know where to get started, even though we've been talking about it. They just don't know where to get started. So, is there some place you'd recommend they start? Maybe it's what you said a minute ago, but just something super simple where they can get off the starting line and get going.
Yeah. I mean, so in healthcare, I would say start with the real simple ones. How many booked visits do you have, and how
Hmm.
many actual visits did you have, and get a kind of a conversion rate going on that. And
Hmm.
then on the intake side, how many inquiries are you getting, however, per week, month, whatever, and how many are you booking?
Hmm.
And understanding just those things alone can help start putting together some, just it'll put together questions,
Yeah.
right? Because what metrics aren't necessarily supposed to give you answers, always answers. They're also supposed to make you ask questions. Why is this
Hmm.
here and not there? Why? How come we're only booked at, you know, we're our booked appointments are 75% of our capacity, but we're only converting 10% of patient intakes. We have the room. Why? What's the problem, right?
Yeah.
We should be. It should hopefully just lend itself to ask questions.
I'm curious before we get to that. I know I said wrap up, but now I'm curious.
Yeah,
How
yeah.
often do you find that the issue is the person who's supposed to be booking them just isn't up to par?
Um, Sometimes I think the bigger issue though is they might not. Sometimes,
The reason
honestly, a
I
lot of
ask is
time
because it's so easy to blame somebody else. So, oh, my
it is,
front desk
yeah,
is terrible. Well, hang on.
yeah, and I would say it's usually not it. What usually is that, so, an organization will hire someone to book new patients, and that's kind of it. And and as much as healthcare doesn't like to admit it, there's a sales component to it. And if you don't have the right personality or the right kind of script or whatever the case is to this person, they just might
Yeah.
be, I mean, so if someone says, oh, well, let me call back in a couple of days, okay, they let them go, instead of
Yeah.
saying, well, look, let's get you on the books because we're filling up fast. And you could always call back and cancel it, but let's get you scheduled and then come in, and then we can, your doctor will make a plan with you from there, right? Like
Yeah.
there
Close
has
the
to be a
deal.
push to, yeah, there has to be that
Yeah.
little bit of a push there at the end.
Yeah. And I'll drop this bomb before this very
Yeah.
obvious bomb. Patients have choices.
Mhm.
When they called you, they either called somebody else before you or they plan to afterwards. And they have choices. Unless you're the one and
Yep.
only person in your town who does what you do, which is almost never the case, they have choices. So,
Yep.
yeah, Adam, this is great stuff. It's really supply demand. How much are you converting? It sounds it's simple, but it's not simplistic, right? It takes real work,
Yep.
dedication,
Yep.
ongoing. So thank you for shining a light on this and help us understanding it a bit better.
Yeah. No, thanks. I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, it's been really good. And you gave us contact information to get a hold of you, and that's going to go into the show notes of your episode. So now anybody who wants to get a hold of you has another way to do so. Couple of points before we wrap up. First, if you're someone like Adam or us, you serve private practice owners, or if you're a private practice owner yourself and you figured out some stuff on the business side of private practice that you think others would benefit from, either way, we want you to come on Practice Care and tell the world about it. In the show notes for Adam's episode and every episode, there's a link, a couple of clicks. Tell us what's on your mind so we can get you scheduled as soon as possible. And finally, if you've listened to a few episodes, you know this. Subscribe to Practice Care, one word Practice Care. We're everywhere. We do a new episode every week, and the easiest way to stay up to date is to subscribe. Thanks very much, and until next time.